You're listening to Make It, a podcast by Bonsai Creative that helps aspiring professionals in film get where they're going faster by dissecting the advice, knowledge, and insights of professional creatives in the film industry. I'm your host, Chris Barkley, and with me today is my good friend and Make It podcast co-host, Nicholas Buggs. Hello, Chris here with another episode of the Make It podcast. And this is an Indie Talk week, and that means I have my good friend and co-founder with me, Nicholas Buggs. Nick, say hello.
What's up, everybody? We are back.
We are back, and there's a lot on our minds. And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about what the Oscars will be like this year. When is enough? Like how many streamers? And we're going to have just a big streamer conversation as well. Winners and losers in streaming, how to make sense of it up or down, what kind of movies you should be making as an indie creative based on what's being streamed, and the streaming squeeze, going back to that sort of when is enough context. You know, the streaming squeeze that's going to happen as people have to start making decisions financially about which streamers to buy and which ones to not. And last but not least, we thought we'd talk a little bit about reintroducing Bonsai to a degree. There's a lot of people that might not know why we do this podcast and what it's all about and where we came from and how it started and what is just the origin story. People love comic book movies, Nick. They love origin stories.
True.
So we want to give a little bit of our origin story, talk about what we do, what we're all about, and what's coming up in the future a little bit. But we'll start right there with just this thing that was on our mind about the award seasons this year, and about 20 to 30 theatrical movies have been pushed to TBD, to be determined, and to 2021. And what you're left with is, you know, The Dark and the Wicked and Jungle Land and Kindred and Mulan and Invisible Man and hopefully Tenet as like your awards favorites, and along with some others. But what's missing in all that are all these other movies, Nick, that we were supposed to see that probably would have got sort of Oscar nods and Golden Globe nods and all that stuff. And the star power that kind of comes with it. Now, look, I'm not all about star power only, but when I think about this movie season, this year of movies, what it's definitely missing is all the big stars that would normally be in theatrical releases. The Brad Pitts, the Leonardo DiCaprios, the Daniel Craigs, so on and so forth. And what we have instead are people who are stars and great talents, but they're in movies and shows that are designed and shot just for streaming, Nick.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you there. You know, if you go back to what you mentioned about the things that we're not seeing because they're getting pushed out, you know, I think there's also the things that we're not seeing in the ways that we're familiar with seeing. So the things that went to streaming that normally would have gone to the theater, right? So it's all different. So yeah, there's a bunch of movies that, you know, are getting pushed into 2021. So we won't see those. The theatrical ones, we don't get the same feeling from watching them at home than we would have, you know, in the theater, not just because they were on a big screen, but because there's always a larger experience around watching those. So that kind of goes away. But, you know, what I always come back to when it comes to, you know, the Oscars is like, well, what gets Best Picture or whatever it is, isn't up to us, right? It's not a populist decision. It's the Academy's decision. So, you know, the movies that they're going to rate, it doesn't matter whether they were seen in the theater by us or not, right? It doesn't matter if some of them were pushed out. They're going to be given, you know, all of these films to see. It's like when you go to Netflix and they push content in front of you, right? And they tell you, hey, because you watch this, this, and this, you should watch this. Mm-hmm. I feel like the Academy doesn't get that. They get something that's much more curated, and that's coming directly from the studios. So who's going to win Oscars 2021? Well, it's going to be Disney, it's going to be Sony Pictures, it's going to be Universal Pictures, it's going to be Bleecker, like Netflix. It's basically the same folks you're going to see. And you may not have seen the movies, and I may not have seen them, but the Academy has seen them because they were sent directly to the Academy for them to consider for Oscar contention.
Yeah, and a lot of these you are going to see great stories, but you're going to see a type of story, I think. And also, I think it's always been a mix of what is a great movie and a great story, and then what was populous, right? Like we had Parasite, but then you also had, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or 1917 last year, or just movies that had, Get Out, for example, movies that had massive box office. And so I would not be surprised if you saw Mulan. Is Mulan a great movie? No, it is not. I liked it. You didn't like it at all, but neither one of us are saying that it's great, but it did huge numbers. Is Invisible Man a great movie? It's good. I would not say it's great. I do love Elizabeth Moss, but that could be maybe up for contention. Even Tenet, which feels like a theater movie, and I saw it in the theater twice. It's a big, bombastic movie. Is it great? Like from a story standpoint? No, it's not. It is beautifully shot. It is well done. It is executed to the nth degree. But that doesn't make it the best story you've ever seen. But you're going to see it because it actually had literal box office, in a theater. So it's kind of like I see it both ways. Like I think we're going to get what was popular this year, but then I think you're going to get movies like On the Rocks, which is kind of like maybe lost in translation. And stories aren't anywhere similar, but it feels like it's a lost in translation part 2 for Bill Murray, or a movie like The Swerve, or Cajillionaire. Cajillionaire is one that you could say, okay, that's going to get a nod, but would it have gotten a nod in any other year? I guess is the question.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of funny when you say, would it have gotten a nod in any other year? Well, there's no year like 2020. It literally stands on its own. So it's just, I think you just have to think about it that way. Like whatever happens this year is what happens this year. Everything, this might be the tipping point, right? This might be the change in what, gets Oscar nominated or wins an Oscar from now until the next 5 to 10 years until something else shifts, but like I said, there's tons. If you go out to Variety and I think they've got a number of films that they're considering for Oscar contention in 2021, and that list isn't short. Right. And what's familiar to me about the list is the lack of familiarity I have with a bunch of the titles. This is one of the same things that happens with me every year with the Oscars. It's like, what movie is that? Like who saw this movie? Like, why is this up for an Oscar? Oh, okay. That director. Oh, okay. That actor. That really wasn't on my list to watch, but hey, I guess maybe I should, right? Because the Oscars are saying that I should. But there's a bunch of movies. I mean, I'm seeing right now, from Searchlight, you got Nomadland, Netflix.
Yeah,
Mank.
Nomadland's got a big push behind it.
Yeah, Netflix, Trial of the Chicago 7. We've got Amazon Studios with One Night in Miami. A24 has Minari. Netflix, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Sony Pictures Classics, The Father. Universal Pictures, News of the World. Netflix, The Prom. Warner Brothers, Judas and the Black Messiah.
Wow.
So that's 10 right there.
Well,
right?
What stands out though, Nick, is that some of those are documentaries, and it's like I wonder if this will be the year where can a documentary actually win Movie of the Year?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, and for me,
or some of those are documentary-like.
The documentary-like, or based on a true story.
Yeah.
But I'll just say this is that there might be a trend towards them. Because of I think there's a growing desire for the docuseries, right? Like we're seeing docuseries now that I don't think we were seeing 2 years ago, right? The number of them that are out there and just the popularity of them. So I think that there is a growing desire for, documentary, or at least things that are reflective of the real.
Yeah.
So, I think that there's something to that. So maybe, again, there's a shift that's happening in 2020 around the types of content that people are interested in, and maybe more introspective content is what people are looking for. I mean, the Joker is not a real story, right? But the way that they made that,
yeah,
that was real. You know what I'm saying? Like that was an introspection into, the troubles of an individual, the troubled mind, and what the world basically did to this person to make them turn in a way.
Yeah.
Then you look at Marriage Story, like, ugh. I mean, that's how I felt about that movie. It's just, ugh. Like, honestly, I'll tell everybody, like my wife and I, because everybody was telling me, oh, you should watch it with your wife. And I'm like, well, we don't watch stuff like that. Like, we don't watch stuff that's like a downer, right? And they're like, no, you should watch it. You should watch it. So we finally, we gave into the social pressure, and we watched it. Man, we didn't make it all the way through that movie. I think we made it halfway through. We're like, this isn't for us, man. Like, this isn't about. No, there's no value we're going to get from this movie. But my point is that it was one of those top films because of the real, right? The realism, the introspective nature of going into these characters in a real, authentic, even dirty way. Like, it just doesn't feel good, but it feels almost real.
Well, I think that's revisionist history to a degree. I mean, look, the thing I will say about this, and going back to your comment about some of the movies from last year, I want movies like Parasite and Jojo Rabbit to win. I thought those stories were the best stories, some of the best stories I'd seen in my life. And I want movies like that to win. I love this idea that more creators are getting to create. What I'm afraid of is that we're not going to there won't be any more Schindler's List. There won't be any more, 3-hour epics. There won't be movies that are shot specifically for theater, because the way you shoot for theater and the way you shoot for streaming are different. And the kind of people that sign on to those kind of films are different. Maybe it won't always be that way, but the reason I say that Joker is revisionist history is because I think Joker was nominated because it was so popular, because it did so well at the box office. And maybe there's a little bit of sort of the social, its theme, Todd Phillips obviously did a great job with the movie. It looks great, but I'm saying the theme of it was very much on level with the current zeitgeist and sort of the feel of people today. If you look at the movie itself, Nick, it was not greatly. It did not do good from a critical standpoint. It was mixed reviews at best. So the critical world did not love the Joker, but the people that watched it loved it because they identified with it through the zeitgeist, and that's why it sold so many tickets. And of course, it's Batman.
Joaquin Phoenix, man, he won.
Yeah, and his job was amazing. That was great acting.
That's what I'm saying. So it's difficult to not, rate a film that high when you're rating the actor who played the main role in the film that high, right? So I think there might be some of that was popular. Again, it's the Batman, it's the Joker. These are things that the folks who love the comic books will clamor to see. But I thought it was very well done and well deserving of its of being listed there. So I look at, you talk about popular. I mean, I'm looking, if you look at the list of nominees, Star Wars wasn't on there.
Yeah, but it wasn't a great story.
Well, I don't know, man. Like, when you come down to you talk about popular, right?
Everyone's gonna kill me now.
No, we talked about popular, right? Yeah. So if that was going to make the mark, then Star Wars should have made it. Right? Come on, but that's not what they're looking at. The Academy is the Academy. They have their own rating system. And I think that's what's going to happen, going forward. And you mentioned, this idea that you're not going to have these epics, be listed as nominees anymore. And I'm like, well, I'm okay with that. I don't think we're losing anything because times have changed.
Well, not just listed as nominees, Nick, but made.
Okay. And again, maybe I'm, in the minority, maybe I'm in the majority. I don't know, but that's okay because we're not there anymore. That's not what we watch anymore. So if they're not getting made, it's because people don't want them. Right. I mean, we're going down to, 10-second content that people are consuming and binge watching. Right. It's hard enough to keep people's attention for 5 seconds. Commercials used to be a lot longer than they are now. Now they're, 6 to 15 seconds, versus how long they used to be. So like everything is shifting and changing. So I think that what we're going to see nominated is just going to be, as you mentioned, kind of like part of the current zeitgeist. And that's okay, because that's how it should be. I don't want to see that the epic always wins because it's an epic, right? Like that. Oh, look how long it was, and like, and how basically the idea that I know you're not talking about the length of the film, but basically like, look how long we were able to sustain greatness, right? That's what's so amazing about epics, right? It's like you were able to be that great for that long. Holy crap.
Well, films have power though. Films have power. Right? Like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but films like that have power. Malcolm X is a powerful film. Schindler's List is a powerful film. These are movies that need to get made and actually help educate the public on moments in history that were important. Even dare I say it, what's the movie with Jim Caviezel where he's the Passion of the Christ? That's an important movie. I don't know if it gets made anymore. It doesn't like serve my belief system necessarily, but it's a movie that we need to have tolerance for and allow to get made. And that's the concern, is that when you shoot for streaming, you shoot in a different way. And I guess eventually the star power, the top talent will follow. But if it doesn't, that's okay. That's more for the indie creator, right? Like, so I think that's pro indie, and that's good. I'm curious, Nick, to see just how it turns out, because it could be, like you say, like a changing of the tide, and maybe we never go back to the way it was or what we're used to, or maybe we view this as the weakest award season in the history of film, outside of maybe the year 2000. So, or was it 99?
Yeah, I think you'll just have to see. Again, I don't think that what gets nominated and what gets awarded could ever be considered weak. But I think that if you were to make a comparison to previous years, and because what I'm looking at is when you mention the epics and the stories, the types of stories that you desire to be told that you think are important, it's not about the Oscars. Whether or not they win an Oscar. I don't believe Malcolm X won one. So it's like, it's really about, storytelling and, how much is going to be shifted. So put Oscars away, put that conversation aside, and you kind of look at going forward between 2020 and let's say 2025, will there be space in our lives for epic films?
It's a great point.
And
will the data allow it to exist? That's the point I'm getting at too a little bit, is we're going to see a data-based potentially award season this year for the first time in history, because the movie didn't get made because the movie needed to get made. It got made. If it's going to a streaming service, it got made because it addresses an audience. Potentially.
Yeah, and I think potentially, but it's a yes, because that's something that we always say in our consults with creatives, is that it addresses an audience, but that audience could simply be a fan base, right? Like Brad Pitt has a fan base. Mm-hmm. Right. So he may not be speaking to any specific community out there or on any, relevant topic, but it's him, and people want to see what he's doing. And I think that that's where you have your star system will continue to apply, isn't in how successful necessarily a movie is on the grand scheme of things. I think it's going to be in the way that you create the media. You're allowed to break the data, you're allowed to break away from the algorithm when you have a following like that.
Yeah.
So again, you can have a Brad Pitt in an epic, that's okay, right? He's going to break your algorithm. It doesn't matter. People are following him. People are looking at his stuff. There's certain directors, same thing. You'll watch their stuff because, hey, you know them and you know they're good for it.
Right. Tarantino,
there's going to be certain,
for example.
Exactly.
Scorsese.
Certain IP. If Star Wars wants to make an epic, they want to make a 3-hour long film, man, Star Wars fans are going to watch it. It's not even a
watch
question.
Anything. Star
yeah,
Wars
that's what I'm saying. So forget your algorithm and all that. No, they'll watch it. So I think there will be room so long as there's, you have some sort of following associated with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think story beats the algorithm too. Like you can have, and I think Apple TV Plus has been really great about that, about sort of telling stories and purchasing movies that are just strictly great stories and well performed. And
hey, I got a question.
And they'll roll it out,
Well, Now that you bring that up, I got a question. Mm-hmm. Is Tom Hanks as an actor, not as a voiceover, right, for Woody, is Tom Hanks as an actor still relevant?
I think so. I think he's probably, if he were to, God forbid, die tomorrow, he would go down as one of the top 100 actors of all time.
Oh, no, for sure. I get that.
Maybe top 50.
No, I'm talking about right now. And the reason I ask is because he's made a couple of films recently that I'm not hearing a lot about. And I don't know if there is something happened in the stories that just didn't quite hit. Like maybe they weren't great stories. But, Tom Hanks, he's going to pull off a great performance. Mm-hmm. Like even if the story's bad, he's going to be great in it. And I'm kind of wondering about that. Like, I'm just not seeing a flood of conversation around Tom Hanks films lately. Right. That's why I'm asking the question. Because basically, right, back to what you said, it's like, well, story and, great acting, that'll all, work itself out and break your algorithm. Like, is Tom breaking the algorithm? Or is he stuck in it?
It just depends, because I think a lot of his movies, they're going to be based on a true story. Some of his movies are sort of historical pieces. They're not. We're in, like you said, like 2020. There's no year like it, and we're in the middle of this pandemic. Everybody has this low grade anxiety going on. They're in their house. They're all getting used to sort of consuming this high end content. And what I mean by that is Hollywood produced films that they've dumped a lot of money into. Doesn't mean the movie's going to be great, but they've dumped a lot of money into. And they're watching it on a streaming device, and we're all just sort of getting used to it right now. And so you can miss movies here or there. There are a lot of shows and movies that like people just haven't watched because there's so much out there to consume, and you just can't watch everything. And do you want to watch it that way? If you're someone that watches Netflix on their computer or iPad, then you're probably binging, or you're probably watching YouTube. You're not necessarily watching a Tom Hanks movie. Whereas normally a Tom Hanks movie would come out in a theater, and then that would create the conversation. You'd get the buzz around how good it was or how well reviewed it was, and that it's Tom Hanks.
Yeah, it's just crazy to me because you just mentioned, again, the story and the performance and stuff. And I was just thinking about Tom Hanks, and I think his latest movie was Greyhound, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I just haven't heard anything about it. So anyway, that's kind of an aside, but it made me think about Tom Hanks. And again, he's relevant to me. He'll always phenomenal
be
on so many different levels that it's, I'd love to see him in even more stuff. But yeah, anyway, that was an aside.
He stole my heart in Big, so he's had me as a fan ever since.
Right, you had me since Big, right?
Yeah, and I saw Big in the theater. It was great, and I don't even think I was old enough to see it, but I saw it. I was with my sisters and my parents, I think. Parents didn't care about their kids back in the day. I think my parents sent me to go watch Nightmare on Elm Street as a kid, like with my sisters.
Yeah, they were good practical jokers.
Yeah, and you can't sleep. You can't sleep for weeks because that's when he shows up.
That's right.
Yeah, and by the way, we're just getting out of October. Halloween, and we're going to talk about that a little bit about streaming, but people have been trying to remake Nightmare on Elm Street for a really long time. not remake it really, like not the IP itself. I'm not talking about literally. I'm saying they've been trying to make something that is impactful like that as a horror film. Again, nobody can do it. It's like you cannot cash someone's lottery ticket twice. They had a brilliant premise. They executed it perfectly. They had a moment in time. They owned it. Like no more sing-songy, like try to like have a little rhyme that's creepy when people sing. That all comes from like being inspired by Nightmare on Elm Street, right? Like can't do it. Can't cash that lottery ticket twice, Nick.
No.
You talked about shortened content and how people are like binging 10-second content, whatever. And so we want to have this conversation about streaming and just sort of the overall state of it. And the most popular show from October was The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix. And you probably would expect that because it's October and there's horror around it. But you still had at number 2 sort of non-horror, well, not sort of, definitely not horror. It's Schitt's Creek being the number 2 streamed show across all streaming platforms. So you had The Haunting of Bly Manor as number 1 across all streaming platforms. Had Schitt's Creek, believe it, number 2. I want to double check that actually really quick, Nick, to make sure I'm right about that. But I think it was way up there. Yeah, number 2 for the month, and then The Mandalorian number 3. And then the god awful Hubie Halloween at number 4. But the thing about these shows and the way that we rank them and the way they're ranked rather across streaming services is that there's no consistency. And so when you're advisory producers like me and you are, Nick, and we want to go out and tell indie filmmakers, okay, this is what people are watching. This is the zeitgeist. This is what people are binging. This is like the mood and the tone that people are looking for today. It's very hard to track because even the month before, you had shows that were in the top 10 that did not show up in the top 10 at all in October. So if you look at top 10 in September, you had Cobra Kai, The Boys on Amazon, Away, Ratchet, Mulan, The Social Dilemma, Get Organized with the Home Edit, Love Guaranteed, and then closed it out with Enola Holmes, and then closed it out with Schitt's Creek. So of those 10 in September, only Schitt's Creek and Ratchet showed up in the top 10 for the following month. And so I don't know, Nick, what's going on here? What can we hold that's true?
Yeah, well, it's like we mentioned before, like all of it is just changing. And it sometimes it seems random. Sometimes it seems like things don't make sense. But the odd thing about it is that it all makes sense now, but just differently, right? It makes sense with the way that the algorithm pushes data to us, or pushes content to us based off data, excuse me. But it's also like the way that we watch content. So, if everyone is binging in October, and then let's just call it, Series A, right? Everyone's binging Series A in October, but there's only one season of it. Well, you're not binging it in November. Mm-hmm. It's done. It's not going to show up on your top 10 because it's done. It's over with. Like the conversation is done, and now they're waiting for the next thing. Either they're waiting for the next season to come, or they're just on to the next thing, right? On to watching the next thing. Right. And then you have something like Schitt's Creek. Well, it won 5 Emmys, right? So you've got a lot of people who are there along for the ride throughout, the multiple seasons they've had, and they already know about it. They've already watched it. But now you've got all these people who are interested. Like, what is this show? 5 Emmys? This is a sweep. Like, what is this about? And they're going to watch it. Yeah. And that might give you a little bit of a longer runway because they've got 6 seasons. Right? A little bit harder to binge all of that stuff at once. So, maybe they'll be top for 2 months, maybe even 3, depending how long it takes the general public who saw the 5 Emmys and they were like, oh, I got to watch it. So maybe get 2 or 3 months out of it. But I think that's what's different now is that it's the way that we watch. We're binging content, and so that you're just waiting for the next binge-worthy thing to happen in the following months. So it's going to continue to shift. And then, like I mentioned about them pushing content to us, to me, that's like the biggest game in the world. Mm-hmm. I tell you what the top 10 are, whether or not they're actually the top 10, and I make them the top 10 because I told you they were the top 10. Right? Like, that's it. You're going to watch it because that's what you do. You are one of the people you're the masses. And, whether you want to believe it or not.
Feels like an election primary.
Exactly. Whether you want to believe it or not, there's a social dilemma that is pushing you into specific content.
Well done.
So I think, thank you. So I think that's basically what's happening. So yeah, it's difficult sometimes to say what kind of content that people should be making. I think, honestly, when it comes down to it, if we're talking to indies about this, I always say, forget all what's going on Netflix and these other places. They're dealing with a totally different game than the indie filmmakers dealing with. The people who will always watch your content are the people that you speak for.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the key. So get out there and speak for them and make sure that your content is available to them, and make sure that they know that you're making the content so that they can support the creation of your content. And that's where you go. All this other stuff, I mean, honestly, I hate to say it, it's like that's the big game. This is Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, totally different game. We're talking about it because it's relevant in the grand scheme of things for filmmaking and what's happening. But for the indie filmmaker, keep your ears and eyes and nose and hands and feet to the ground, right? Be there with the people in your community. If you're supporting them, then they'll support you.
Well, what you just said was so important. I mean, kudos, because I think that and I said it earlier in this conversation, I think there's a deluge of content. And so as a creative and an independent creative at that, you start to get the sense that there's so much out there. How can I make anything that competes? And then when you actually look at the data and you break it down, you realize, like, Amazon has one show that peaks into the top 10 and carries their whole network viewing, which was The Boys in September, and then it completely fell off the map in October. And if you look at Apple TV, for all the great content that they truly make on Apple TV Plus, they have one show that really carries all their viewership, and that's Ted Lasso. For as great and diverse and how much market share Netflix has, they really have The Office and Schitt's Creek that drives all viewership and hours spent on that platform in a lot of ways. Because everything else, to your point, Nick, earlier, is that they're binging it, they're over with it, and then that's like, what's next? What's the next entree? What's the next meal? The sort of time spent on the platform, which justifies sort of ROI in the data sets for them, for the streamers, it's all being pushed by just a few very small pieces of content. If you look at the whole thing, Disney Plus is let's release a massive thing once every 3 months, and that's going to drive our viewership. Without The Mandalorian, compared to all the other top streamers, no one's watching Disney Plus. It literally just comes down to The Mandalorian. Before that, it literally came down to Hamilton. Before that, it literally came down to Mulan. And so this is how they're surviving right now. And before Mulan, it was season 1 of The Mandalorian. So that's what they're doing to drive viewership. And so if you think about it that way as an indie creative, you know that if you, speak to your people, have your audience, make content for people who you know are going to watch your stuff, you'll always have viewership. And it's not that there's so much content out there you can't compete, because there's just a few shows that are really driving viewership across all these platforms.
You have to continue to echo this sentiment and just say, you have to be about a community of people. You have to be an echo for the voice of someone who needs someone to speak for them. I think that's the key to the independent filmmaker.
Yeah. So I wanted to make a point kind of close to the point that we were just making about sort of what is, again, there's a sense that there's all this content out there and that all this stuff is going to be the future. And we think it is too. But there was a poll that was recently done by YouGov. And this poll was done because there's no certainty around a next stimulus package coming. You have the money printer himself, Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve, saying, hey, we're out of tricks we can pull at the Fed. If you don't have a stimulus, the economy is going to crash or whatever. I think you're going to see mass layoffs in Q4, not to be doom and gloom, but I just think we talked about this in the last Indie Talk. I think a lot of these companies and their capital allocation is really poor. I think investors don't even realize the half of how poorly some of these large corporations are run. And so when they don't get that extra stimulus money, they're going to lay people off. Money's going to get tight, and people are going to literally have to make a choice. Do we keep Hulu or do we keep Netflix? Do we keep Prime? Or do we keep Apple TV Plus? Do we keep Disney Plus? Do we keep the premium subscription to Peacock? Do we keep HBO Max? And as you start to make those decisions and sort of skinny up your budget, which would you keep? And so YouPoll did this, or YouGov did this poll that asked, what are the must-have streaming services? And number one was, Nick, do you know?
Let's guess Netflix.
You're right, Netflix. So 49% of the respondents said Netflix is must-have, and that's got to make Reed Hastings and crew smile ear to ear, because that's a pretty damn good response. But what I thought was very compelling was number two. And number two was none. None. No services are must-have. And that's got to be terrible news for everyone but Netflix that's in the streaming game. Meaning, when times are tight, people will literally just cut off all services except Netflix. Netflix is like the new cable. Everything else gets their cord cut, so to speak. I know it's digital, so it's not really cutting the cord, but you get my point. And they'll just keep Netflix. By the way, don't believe that? Number three is YouTube. So we're not YouTube Red, not YouTube TV, YouTube. So we'll just watch content on our phone. And if they had probably listed out TikTok, had they listed out Instagram, had they listed out some of these other social media networks, those probably would have shown up on the list as well, ahead of like Hulu, ahead of Prime, ahead of Apple TV or HBO Now, et cetera. So, or HBO Max. I think that probably would have been true, Nick. I don't know. But my guess is that people can kind of deal with just having Netflix, which I think is very, very fascinating.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious sometimes, if you were to ask the average person, what were the top three streaming services, I wonder if they would actually include YouTube. Because
I don't know if they do.
Exactly. Right. So I think that was an interesting one, for it to come up third on there. Sometimes I wonder, were they given some of these choices? How were they given some of these choices? But it's interesting because if I looked at it and I were to say the number one streaming service, it would actually be YouTube because of the utility of it. Right. There's not necessarily as much, or I would say there's not at all nearly as much utility to Netflix as there is to YouTube. It's used in a different way.
Yeah.
But the idea that Netflix came out on top might have simply been just because that's what people think about when they think streaming services. They don't think about YouTube in that same way. So, but yeah, I'm curious too, I've mentioned to you before, I got Peacock and I'm, just taking the time to cancel it. That's all I got to do is just get around to canceling it, because I'm going to cancel it. But it's just I think one of the things with Netflix,
you have a fire in your belly about Peacock.
I do, man. It's because it's flipping annoying. And the reason I say it's flipping annoying is because it's they didn't get the basics right. That's it. People, you're going to go back to YouTube because you know what you're going to get. It's basic stuff. It's basic search. There's basic things where you can pin something and make it a favorite or whatever. You can get back to it really easily. Netflix is the same way kind of deal. You know what to get. You know what you're going to get. You know how to use a search capability. You know stuff's going to pop up. You know your continue watching is going to be there. It's straightforward. Like there's nothing to think about, and you're always going to get this. Now, Peacock came around, and I got that because I wanted to stream some of my soccer games, Premier League, and the fact that I'm watching this thing. And I am like, something happened, right? My web page went out. I was watching on my computer, right? Something crashed.
Yeah.
I open this thing back up, and it starts from the beginning. I'm like, why don't you start where you stopped, right? And then I'm like, okay, then let me start it where I stopped. Well, I can't. Like, I don't know. The bar at the bottom doesn't let me click on a certain time. I'm over here just clicking blindly, hoping that I can get it back to the time that I was on, but I don't know what time I'm clicking on. Mm-hmm. Like, what are you doing, Peacock? Search. I search for Chelsea. It gives me one result, and it says highlights. I know you all have the full game. Like, that's why I got this. Like, why don't I see this in the search results? Why are you making this difficult for me? Right. And that's what I mean. It's like, I think that's what happens sometimes with these, when you start getting other streaming services, you have a sense of what it should be based off of the bigger or the streaming services that you've already had. Right. So YouTube TV, straightforward. Search is easy. The DVR thing is easy for saving things and saying what you want to get recorded. Everything's simple. You got your library, you got home, you got live TV. It's straightforward. Right. I know what I'm going to get. So now if I ever get another service that doesn't give me what I want in the way that I'm expecting it, it's short-lived. Right. I just don't have time. And I think that when you talk about, having streaming services, and figuring out when's enough is enough, honestly, I think it comes down to like what you're really a fan of. And for me, like if you're a fan of basketball, if you're a fan of the NBA, you're going to find ways to watch that. Like that's just, you're always going to have it. But anything else that you got because maybe there was a show that you wanted to watch or there was this one specific movie that only came out on that streaming service, then maybe you got it for that. But after a while, if worse comes to worse, push comes to shove, or you just start paying attention to your bank account and realize you're paying for stuff you don't use, then it's going to be like, no, I'm cutting all that stuff out. So if I'm a fan, I'm in. If I'm not a fan, then I'm out. I was like, for me, I could be done with Netflix tomorrow because I'm not a fan of Netflix, right? I'm not a fan of any specific show or thing that they do. I'm the guy who goes through and I click on all the shows. I'm like, okay, what do I want to watch? Click, 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 click. I keep going, click, click, click. And then you know what I end up watching?
What? I
end up watching the little previews that run like screensavers because I can't figure out what I want to watch. And I'm working on my computer. I'll sit and do something else than have that running in the background because I'm not a fan of anything. So for me, it comes down to like the main thing I'm a fan of is like the Premier League.
Yeah.
So what do I have to pay? Just tell me whatever it is. I'll pay that and I'll watch the Premier League because I'm a fan. Everything else can go. Now, YouTube is difficult because I don't necessarily see it the same way as the rest of the streaming services because I see all of the other streaming services as entertainment. Even the ones that show documentaries, it's like, well, that's entertainment that also educates me. Mm-hmm. Whereas YouTube is a little bit of everything. If I want to specifically be educated and learn how to do a thing, I go to YouTube. So I don't even keep it in the same conversation as a Netflix or YouTube TV or anything like that.
I think YouTube creates a competition problem for almost every other platform, entertainment or not, for that very reason. I mean, I learned how to combine my love for veggie burgers with my love for, regional specialty. And now I'm like an expert at making regional burgers at home. And I just make crazy, delicious regional burgers. You want a Juicy Lucy made of veggie meat? I got you. Like that's all.
And
that's all YouTube
that,
based,
right? Yeah. But you could have seen that on Netflix, but you wouldn't have gotten the recipe, right? They would have talked about how this famous chef, hangs upside down by his toe and barbecues it over the fire of, baby dragon's breath, and you would have been like, "That's the coolest thing I've ever seen." But he didn't show you how to make the Juicy Lucy. Got to go to YouTube for that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There seems like there's a ceiling because there's already 300 plus streaming services. All of them are going to have their flagship show. We can't sign up for 300 things, guys. Like we can't do it. So what's going to happen is that you're going to start to see mass consolidation in the next 5 years, where just big, giant companies are going to eat the smaller ones. And then we're going to have these services. They're going to be packaged. And guess what you're going to have? You're going to have cable TV on your TV, not through a cable service, just on your Apple TV box or your Roku box or your Google Chromecast or whatever you have. Like that's going to be the new cable TV, and it's all going to be owned by the biggest eater of companies. That's basically going to be it. And look, the squeeze is already happening. The baby boomers are spending just about $30 a month on streaming services. Gen X is spending just about $45, and millennials are spending $65, $70. But millennials don't. But that was in May, and if you look now into October, millennials are cutting back. They went from $65, almost $70 a month on streaming services down to below $50 in September and October. And so you're seeing everyone, babes, except for baby boomers, pulling back. Boomers are spending more money, I think, because they have the money for now. And you're seeing everyone else pull way, way back. So streaming companies, get ready. And hey, if all else fails, you can go with none. And I think one will be happy. And if all else fails, you can go with YouTube, which has always been endlessly entertaining and educational for me. So maybe you feel the same. So to wrap things up, there are a lot of people that ask, well, why do you guys do this podcast? We have a lot of new listeners that say, well, where did this come from? Why are you guys doing it? What's your origin story, if you will? Like, what, tell us more about Bonsai. I know you want us to go to your website and see you on social, but how did this whole thing start? I thought it'd be a fun way to just wrap us up here, Nick, just to talk about where this whole thing started. And it really began as a sort of passion project for me and Nick back in 2015 and 2016, when we were trying to understand and do research into the independent film market. And one of the ways we would do this is we'd do random surveys of people and ask them all these questions. And one of the questions we'd ask, we literally would walk around with a clipboard, and there are people out there that know us in film that remember me walking around with a backpack and a clipboard. And we would walk around with this clipboard, and sometimes I'd have like my little recorder in my hand that I used to use back in my journalism days, and I would record this stuff. So I'd record the answer to these 10 questions. And one of the questions we would ask is, what does making it mean to you? What does it mean for you to make it? And 80% of the people would say, making it to me just means that I can do what I love and pay my bills. Simple as that. And then the other 20% were honest. I want to be famous. I want to make a great movie. I want to be wildly, wildly rich. And I'm kidding. I think that 80% were truthful to a degree. I don't want to, because I'm an optimist. Nick, you probably might have a more cynical view of those answers, but that was the answers that we got. And it started to become this thing where it's like, okay, it seems to us that the common theme amongst all independent creatives, regardless of what they want and how they answered the other 9 questions, is that they want to make it. They want to basically be able to look in the mirror every day, wake up and say, I'm an artist. I'm a film creative, and I make stuff that brings people joy or tells a story or supports a cause or sheds light or shines light on a social injustice or cause. And this is who I want to be. I'm somebody who creates beautiful things in the world, and I pay my bills doing it. I think there were other creatives, Nick, that would answer that question and would have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, like, hey, there are people who said, I'm crazy for doing this, and now I want to prove them wrong. And there are people that we talked to that said, hey, I put off being a creative, went the corporate route for years, and just was like depressed. And so I just said, fuck it. I'm going to go and, do my creative thing and see what happens, Nick.
Yeah, and I think that, if you look at all this, you look at the creatives that we've spoken to, and just being a creative in general, I think that there's just this innate sense that, even if it doesn't come out early enough, it may come out later. Like you mentioned, people going into the corporate world and then stepping into this creative space. It's because they have to, right? It's like they can't avoid it. They can't avoid this feeling inside of them to create. So it's just like, there's no choice for me. I have to do this. So making it basically is listening to that voice that says, you must do this. This is your calling. But then being able to sustain the calling, right? Like, that's it. I mean, and of course there's different gradations of that, where it's like, well, now I can be rich and famous, doing the thing that I've wanted to do. But I think all of it, I think that 80% is right. It's just like, I just want to be able to do this without struggling to do it. Right. That's the key. So I just want to make. As long as I can continue to get paid, I can put food on the table, I can take care of my family, but I can be a creative, then that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. So I think that's that authentic voice is just like, I just have to do this.
Absolutely. And so fast forward from the days of Chris and Nick with the clipboard to 2018, when we started this podcast, late 2018, it really came to our attention, and people had recommended that we even do it, that, well, we could extrapolate on these answers and go a little bit deeper with the interviews. And what we were finding basically was everybody wanted the same thing, but two, what was happening is a lot of creatives were able to make one film, but because of the sort of shortcomings and ignorance and the tough decisions they had to make on the fly, they weren't able to make that second, third, fourth, fifth film and sustain a career. So literally the thing between an independent film creative making it, which is all they wanted to do, and not making it, was what they didn't know. And so we said, okay, well, let's make this podcast where we bring in people who have made that one film and made those mistakes and can look back on it with an honest lens and say, here are the things that I would recommend. Or let's bring in people who have made multiple films or multiple shows or have worked on multiple teams and crews, and take that wisdom and those tools and those tactics and all the different things they do to actually do what they've done, which is to make it and pay their bills as a film creative. And let's get them to sort of testify on the microphone, if you will, and on the record on this podcast. And that has just maturated into what the Make It podcast is today, where we do indie talks, we do deep dive interviews, we do industry insights, mistakes in the making, film investment series, and we try to approach independent film from a particular point of view that's uniquely bonsai, but also enough different sort of POVs that no matter who you are in film, you can get something of value from it. And so from the podcast came the blog posts and our keynote speeches and a forthcoming book. And so we hope to keep, doubling down with the audience's permission and you guys along for the ride with us, to keep providing value to the independent creative. And in terms of the podcast, Nick, we have so much in store. We're gonna keep upping the ante on quality, do some hopefully unique and innovative stuff around the podcast in the next 12 months. And if the pandemic lets up, that'll be even better, because we'll be able to do these face-to-face interviews, content pieces, man on the street pieces, maybe video pieces. And the future is exciting for the Make It podcast.
Yeah, and I just wanted to offer that, you mentioned that we come with a specific voice or unique voice, or even, let's say, a specific context to the discussions that we have. And I think that, even prior to 2018, when we started the podcast, we did a lot of research, and we actually attempted in many different ways to provide resources to filmmakers by scouring the internet to find things that we thought would be of value to independent filmmakers. And, what we saw was that, some of what we were providing was actually starting to collect dust, in that it's some things that, were printed, let's say, 20 years ago, that people generally knew, they generally knew the gist of it, but weren't necessarily interested in opening the book again, and reading those things. There's a ton of YouTube channels out there that show you how to master lighting and master sound and do all of these things in the making of the film itself. And we thought that's nice. And those are things that filmmakers will find on their own, that they'll get from, trial and error. But that's not us. We're not in there, making the film. What is the thing that, we believe is challenging the independent filmmaker the most? And, through our research on that and again, providing these resources, we found that the biggest gap was really in, the business of film.
Yep.
Right. And understanding, how audiences work and how they consume content, or how do they identify content that they actually want to watch. And then, of course, this huge split between the independent filmmaking community and the big studios and the big streamers. There's this idea that the independent filmmaker wants to aspire to being, to getting their film on Netflix or somewhere else. But the chasm between the independent filmmaking community and those streamers continues to grow. But, we don't have to keep falling into the chasm or being subject to it. We need to rethink the way that we create content and for whom we create content. These are the types of things that we want to get out there to the community so that they understand that they don't have to continue to beat their heads against the wall, doing the things that they used to do. There's new ways of doing things. Right. So that's where the focus is. And like you mentioned about all of our guests, we, I think, are slightly different from a lot of other podcasts in that, we aren't necessarily pushing those guests into responses about very specific things that we are particularly interested in. We are more interested in their, generally their experiences and who they are, because they shape how they've been able to find success or make mistakes in the industry. So the uniqueness of their voices and their journeys, I think, speak volumes to the many independent filmmakers out there who have different independent voices and unique journeys that could be impacted. So I think that there's, we try to provide a lot of value because we still believe that, there's a bit of a void out there for independent filmmakers and content that speaks directly to giving them actionable advice to help them be successful.
Well said. I could not say it better myself. And I think that's a great place for us to stop and wrap this up. Nick, thank you again for a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, man, this is awesome. I love doing it. Look forward to the next one for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I hope that little origin story of Bonsai and more specifically the Make It podcast is good and lands well with everyone out there listening. And if you guys have more questions, send them in and I'll tell you where to do it. You can reach out to us at contact@bonsai.film. That's BONSAI.FILM. So you can email us there. It's probably easier to reach us on social. You can send us comments and requests and questions and concerns at _Bonsai Creative. That's on Instagram and on Twitter. You can also reach out to us on Facebook. All you have to do is search for Bonsai Creative and we'll come right up on Facebook. One of the best places to talk to us, though, is on our website, and that's full of resources as well. That's at www.bonsai.film. You can also become one of our creatives in the bonsai community by going there. And if you know someone that would be great for the podcast, or you have suggestions for the podcast, there's also a form you can fill out on that site, on our site, that makes those suggestions as well, and we'll follow up on them if they are valid, Nick.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Yeah. And so with that, Nick, send us off with the credo, my friend.
Yes, sir. So for all of our independent filmmakers out there and all of our creatives, I'll say, be better, be creative, be engaged.
And thank you for listening. Nick, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, man. Take it easy.
All right. Peace.
Later.
Juicy Lucy. You've been listening to the Make It podcast. To find more information about this week's topics, including links to relevant blog posts, projects, and indie creatives, please visit our website at www.bonsai.film. If you haven't already, you can join our podcast community on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice by searching for Make It Bonsai Creative, and the show will pop right up. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _Bonsai Creative and Facebook by searching for Bonsai Creative. And of course, if you're looking to take a big step towards your filmmaking success, go to www.bonsai.film and click on Book Us to schedule a free discovery meeting and needs assessment. You have everything to gain. Until next time, be better, be creative, be engaged, and thank you for listening.